The day after Karen was detained, the lakefront neighborhood was in chaos. Her arrest had shocked the HOA board into temporary silence, and for a moment, it seemed like I might get some peace. But of course, nothing about Karen's little empire was that simple. By noon, the remaining board members, specifically her loyal lieutenants Greg, Susan, and a slippery guy named Doug, began damage control. They issued a statement to the HOA community, claiming Karen had been unlawfully apprehended during a routine inspection, and that the HOA would be resuming normal oversight of the surrounding properties, including those not yet in compliance. In other words, they were pretending nothing had happened and doubling down on their fantasy that I was part of their jurisdiction. I could have ignored them again, but something told me I needed to strike before they regrouped, so I visited the county clerk's office and pulled every deed, plat, and property map I could find. I had a hunch, and it paid off. Not only did my property stand entirely outside the HOA's reach, but I also discovered something the board either didn't know or hoped I wouldn't find out. When the developers had drawn up the original plans for their luxury lakeside subdivision, they had failed to secure lakefront access of their own. Instead, they relied on a narrow 50-foot easement that crossed a forgotten sliver of land, which I now owned. A forgotten sliver had been bundled with my cabin in the purchase. It wasn't just shoreline, it was the only official access point to the lake that their entire neighborhood used for kayaking, fishing, and boating. Without it, their docks were technically landlocked. They had no legal way to get their boats into the water without trespassing. I had to read the plat map 3 times to believe it. Suddenly I understood why Karen had been so desperate to claim my property. It wasn't about my shed or my dock. It was about controlling the only access to the lake and, by extension, the only access to the community's docks. That same afternoon, I had a surveyor come out and place permanent boundary markers. By the next morning, I installed a large sign at the entrance to the easement. Private property, no public access, violators will be prosecuted. And just for fun, I set up 2 trail cams to catch any trespassers in action. Within hours, the HOA's community message board exploded. Angry posts from residents lit up the feed. Why is the lake access closed? I tried to walk my kayak down and was yelled at by that cabin guy who owns that land anyway. I knew it wouldn't take long before someone tried to challenge me directly, and sure enough, by the following weekend, Greg the new self-proclaimed acting president of the HOA came storming down the easement with a measuring tape, a clipboard, and a camera crew. That's right, a literal camera crew. He claimed they were from the HOA's media division, which was apparently just Susan holding her iPhone and Doug awkwardly filming while tripping over weeds, or documenting unlawful obstruction of community resources, Greg announced, standing right in front of the sign I'd posted. Can't just shut down public access like this. I smiled, handed him a copy of the deed, and said, "It's not public, and I can." He huffed and pointed toward the lake. "Then we'll go to court. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." I already had one of my own on speed dial. The HOA might have been loud, but they didn't have the law on their side, and the deeper I dug, the more skeletons I found. Turns out the subdivision had dozens of code violations buried under years of ignored inspections, improper runoff management, unapproved fencing, and multiple non-compliant retaining walls along the waterline. One storm, and half their docks would slide into the lake. Meanwhile, I began turning my slice of paradise into a fortress. I installed floodlights, reinforced the dock with treated timber, and built a brand new fence along the western boundary. Just for kicks, I installed a keypad gate across the easement. If they wanted access, they'd have to get past that too. That's when the HOA shifted tactics again. I started receiving daily letters, each more ridiculous than the last. 1. Accused me of contributing to noise pollution by playing classic rock. Another cited me for improper pet management, even though I didn't own a pet. Then came the most outrageous one of all, a bill for $4,372 in back HOA dues. I framed it and hung it on the wall. The audacity was breathtaking, but I knew what they were really doing. They were trying to bait me, to push me into making a mistake, so they could sue or get the county involved. I wasn't going to fall for it. Instead, I kept recording. Every visit, every letter, every sign they tried to remove. My cameras were always rolling. One evening, after dark, I caught Doug sneaking onto my property and trying to loosen the bolts on the easement gate. He didn't know about the motion-activated lights. They came on like floodlights in a prison yard, and Doug froze like a raccoon. In headlights. I stepped onto the porch holding a thermos and shouted, "Smile for the sheriff." He bolted. I sent the footage to my friend at the FBI, who forwarded it to the local prosecutor. Trespassing was one thing, but tampering with private infrastructure was another level of stupid. At this point, the entire HOA was unraveling. Residents were losing trust, furious that their only lake access was gone, and that their dues were being wasted on a fake war. I knew something big was coming. Karen was still out on bail, and her silence wasn't going to last forever. All I had to do was keep holding the line and let their own arrogance dig the hole deeper. ChatGPT said, "The first time the HOA marched up my gravel driveway like they owned the place, I knew they had picked the wrong target, but I let them talk anyway. If you're sick of HOAs pushing their weight around like they're royalty and ruining peaceful lives, make sure you subscribe to Sham Stories right now, because what you're about to hear is the kind of tale they'll try to bury." It started 2 months ago when I finally moved into my dream cabin nestled deep in the pines beside a quiet lake. A property I bought outright from an old family friend who was liquidating assets to move overseas. The cabin had no HOA, no dues, and no restrictions. Came with 2.5 acres of land, a sizable chunk of the shoreline, and a rickety wooden dock that had weathered decades of storms. What I didn't know until after I moved in is that a new luxury lakeside subdivision had cropped up on the other side of the inlet, 98 homes packed close together like sardines. All part of an overly aggressive HOA led by none other than Karen Withers, a woman who wore her entitlement like armor and thought a laminated HOA badge gave her more authority than the county sheriff. Within 48 hours of moving in, before I'd even finished unloading boxes, Karen herself appeared at my cabin door, flanked by 2 clipboard-wielding cronies. She didn't knock. She rang the bell 3 times fast and shouted HOA business, like she was raiding a meth lab. When I opened the door, she glanced at my flannel shirt, muddy boots, and the canoe leaning on my porch like I was a pest, not a neighbor. "This cabin violates multiple regulations," she announced without preamble. "Your dock isn't permitted, your shed is an eyesore, and you have non-compliant fencing. You need to submit an application to the HOA Architectural Committee immediately or face penalties." I laughed right in her face. "This isn't part of your HOA. I don't have to do a damn thing." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." That's when the real war began. Karen wasn't used to resistance. She started slow passive-aggressive letters taped to my front door. Threatening emails, notices with fake legalese that tried to mimic official county documents. I ignored them all. But then, things escalated. One morning I woke up to find a bright orange notice nailed to my dock, declaring it condemned due to unsafe conditions per HOA Regulation 14A. That same afternoon, a truck pulled up and dumped a pile of gravel right in front of my access road, claiming it was community construction debris staging. I called the county. They said they hadn't issued any notices. I called the sheriff. He confirmed there were no active code violations. That's when I realized the HOA was operating beyond their authority, trying to absorb my property into their little kingdom without any legal basis. I started documenting everything: dates, times, pictures, license plates. Karen didn't like that one bit. Next came the eviction letter. Yes, an actual printed eviction notice, complete with a fake seal, claiming that my presence negatively impacted the character of the neighborhood. I posted that gem on my fridge that weekend, while enjoying a peaceful BBQ on my deck, complete with steaks, beer, and some classic rock playing from my Bluetooth speaker. I noticed a group of HOA members in polo shirts and khakis gathered at the edge of my property, binoculars out, taking pictures like I was a wildlife exhibit. They pointed at my grill, my firewood pile, even my boat trailer. That evening, I received an email titled, "Final Notice. Cease unauthorized activities." According to them, I was in violation for excessive outdoor smoke, non-conforming outdoor furniture, and harboring an unapproved watercraft. I sent a 2-word response: "Prove it." That week, Karen came back. This time she had backup. 5 men dressed in what looked like cheap law enforcement uniforms, navy shirts, khaki pants, metal badges that said community enforcement, patrol. They rolled in like a SWAT team, marched onto my property, and started barking orders. "You need to vacate these premises immediately," one of them shouted, hand hovering near his belt like he was packing heat. But I could tell they weren't real cops. Their gear was off-brand, and they had no authority, just HOA goons playing dress-up. Unfortunately for them, I had already looped in a friend of mine who worked for the FBI. He had been watching the HOA's antics with growing interest, especially the impersonation of law enforcement. And the second those fake cops stepped foot on my land and made threats, he made a call. Within minutes, 2 black SUVs came roaring down the road, unmarked but official. Real federal agents poured out and identified themselves, weapons drawn. Ordering the HOA officers to stand down, Brent screamed, "This is harassment! I'm the president of the HOA!" But no one listened. The fake cops were handcuffed, read their rights, and taken away. Karen was detained for questioning. Turns out impersonating law enforcement is a felony, and she had done it more than once. The BBQ was ruined, sure, but I couldn't have asked for a better end to the day. I poured myself a drink, stood on my dock, and watched the sun set over the lake, knowing the real fireworks were only just beginning. The fallout from Doug's nighttime trespass was more significant than I expected. By Monday morning, I received a call from the sheriff's department confirming they were pursuing charges. That alone would have been enough to send a message. But it triggered a chain reaction no one on the HOA board had seen coming. Several homeowners in the neighborhood, already fed up with the ongoing drama and the board's obsession with me, started calling for a full audit of the HOA's finances. Rumors spread fastward was that dues were being mishandled and that funds had been redirected toward legal fees and security measures targeting my property. Within days, a special emergency meeting was scheduled. Of course, I wasn't invited, but my cameras captured it all from a distance. The board stood on the clubhouse patio, red-faced and defensive, while a crowd of angry residents demanded answers. Someone in the crowd, an older woman I'd never met, shouted, "Why are we spending thousands chasing a guy who doesn't even live in the HOA?" The meeting dissolved into shouting, and Susan actually stormed off in tears. Greg tried to restore order, but failed miserably, and Doug didn't even show up. I watched the whole thing unfold like it was a reality show, sipping coffee on my deck. But even as the board teetered on collapse, they weren't ready to surrender. The very next morning, I woke up to find 2 new notices of violation, duct-taped to my mailbox. One accused me of unauthorized landscaping. The other claimed I was blocking emergency water access. Both were laughable, but they proved the HOA wasn't giving up. That afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood, not to intimidate, but to make my presence known. I nodded to anyone who made eye contact, ignoring the glares from a few. Of the board's loyalists, surprisingly, several residents approached me. One man, Tom, said quietly, "I don't know what they're trying to pull, but just so you know, half of us are on your side." That was a turning point. I wasn't just the outsider anymore. It was the guy who had exposed the HOA's incompetence, who had stood firm when they tried to bulldoze over someone they thought would fold. That evening, I received an anonymous tip through a burner email. Attached were scanned documents, HOA board minutes, emails, and receipts. One email from Karen to Greg was especially damning. It read, "We need that land. If we can't get it legally, we'll make him so uncomfortable he'll want to sell. Push harder. Make him feel boxed in." That was enough for me. Forwarded the files to my attorney and asked him to prepare a cease and desist, citing harassment, attempted coercion, and property interference. Then I went further. I contacted the county zoning board and offered to host a site inspection of the HOA docks and shoreline structures. I played it neutral, simply stating I was concerned about unpermitted construction along the shared water line. The inspector came 2 days later, and I gave him a full tour, complete with photos of the retaining walls I'd mentioned earlier. His expression said everything. "This is bad," he muttered. "Real bad." By the time he left, I knew the clock was ticking for the HOA. Sure enough, the county issued formal citations to the HOA within the week, demanding immediate compliance or risk forced removal of several dock platforms and concrete pads that violated both zoning and environmental codes. That hit them like a thunderclap. Suddenly, their little kingdom wasn't just under social and legal pressure, it was under structural threat. And I wasn't done. Knowing how much they valued the lake access, I filed a formal petition to limit pedestrian use of the easement entirely, citing safety, liability, and harassment concerns. I had documented enough aggressive incidents, including Doug's break-in and Greg's repeated confrontations, to justify it. I also installed a tall privacy fence along the sides of the easement to ensure no one could wander onto my land again. The cherry on top was the new gate I added to my dock. A sleek, locked entry with a security camera pointed straight at the path. I posted signs reading, "Private dock. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." Wasn't being petty, I was being prepared. The HOA board had underestimated me from the start, but now they were watching everything they had built teeter on the edge of collapse. Karen, meanwhile, had re-emerged with a new lawyer, trying to claim that her actions were within the scope of HOA enforcement. Her legal team argued that because the community had used the easement for years, they had a prescriptive right to continue using it. Unfortunately for them, they hadn't done their homework. My deed had been properly recorded, my boundary clearly marked, and the easement had never been formally granted for community use. It had merely been tolerated by the previous owner. That distinction made all the difference. My lawyer responded with a scorched earth letter dismantling their claims line by line, supported by case law and survey records. Karen's team went silent again. At the same time, several residents began circulating a petition to dissolve the current HOA board altogether. They had grown tired of the power games, the mismanaged funds, and the obsession with fighting a battle they couldn't win. The movement gained traction quickly. Signs started appearing in windows. "Reclaim our neighborhood." I knew then that the board's days were numbered, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. They'd proven they were willing to go further than anyone expected. And I had a feeling that if they were going to lose power, they'd try to burn something down on their way out. Even though Karen had disappeared from the HOA meetings and community circles, her presence lingered like a sour scent in the air. People whispered her name cautiously, unsure if she was truly gone or just hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I kept my guard up, taking no chances, and continued improving my property, not out of spite, but because I could finally breathe again. The new HOA board, led by Frank, kept their word. They launched a formal audit of all past HOA actions and quickly uncovered several troubling discrepancies. Documents were missing, funds were misallocated, and there were signed notices that had never been mailed, some even forged. Frank personally delivered a statement apologizing to me on behalf of the HOA, stating they had found no basis for the original complaints filed against me. They even offered to reimburse me for the legal costs I had incurred, which I politely declined, not because I didn't need the money, but because I wanted them to feel the weight of responsibility. What I didn't expect was the way the community shifted around me. Residents who had once eyed me warily now waved with smiles, dropped off baked goods, and struck up conversations. One elderly couple even asked if they could host their anniversary party on the dock, and I gladly agreed. The lake had gone from being a source of conflict to the heart of the neighborhood again. And the more it was used with care, the more people appreciated what it really meant to have it preserved. I began organizing monthly cleanup days where volunteers helped keep the shoreline pristine, and in return, I opened up the lot for limited parking and special events. What had once been a standoff became a partnership, and it felt like a new era. But of course, not everyone embraced it. One afternoon, I got a call from a neighbor who lived near the old HOA storage shed. He said a woman had been seen snooping around it late at night. When I asked for a description, his voice lowered to a whisper. Looked a lot like Karen. I checked the footage from the community security cameras Frank had recently upgraded. Sure enough, there she was. Hoodie pulled up, moving fast, trying to avoid the cameras, but not realizing their range had been extended. I flagged the footage and sent it to Frank, who then sent it to the sheriff's department. Turns out Karen had stolen a few files and attempted to tamper with old HOA records. She was caught a week later trying to pawn a laptop that still had a property of HOA sticker on the back. The arrest wasn't dramatic, but it made the local paper, and people finally saw just how far she'd fallen. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen had one more desperate card to play. She filed a lawsuit, not against me this time, but against the HOA itself. She claimed wrongful termination, harassment, and defamation. The suit named individual board members, including Frank, and accused them of conspiring to ruin her reputation. The audacity of it would have been laughable if it wasn't so clearly a distraction tactic. She was trying to tie everyone up in court, drag out proceedings, and force the HOA to spend money it didn't have. Once again, I offered to help, not with legal fees, but by presenting the media with a detailed timeline of events, complete with documentation and video evidence. I knew public pressure would keep the case from gaining traction. Local news picked it up, once again portraying Karen as a rogue HOA tyrant who tried to take over a lake and got burned. Her lawsuit crumbled within weeks, dismissed as frivolous, and the HOA countersued for damages and legal costs. Karen had finally burned every bridge she had. Meanwhile, life by the lake became more peaceful than I ever imagined. I hosted a community fishing tournament, and kids ran up and down the dock laughing, casting lines and celebrating their small victories. Retirees came by with their lawn chairs and sat in the shade, reading books and chatting with one another. What was once a battlefield had become a refuge, and I found myself smiling more often, waking up early just to watch the mist lift off the water. The cabin felt like home, not a bunker. And the people around me felt like neighbors again, not enemies. One evening, Frank stopped by with a cooler full of drinks and said something that stuck with me. "You didn't just protect your property," he said. "You protected our community from itself." I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded and handed him a cold beer. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, and for the first time since I moved in, I truly felt at peace. But deep down, I knew something else. Karen might be gone from this story, but people like her never vanish entirely. Somewhere out there, someone else was learning from her mistakes, or worse, planning to do it all over again, just smarter next time. All I could do was stay ready, stay grounded, and never forget what it took to protect what was mine. And maybe, just maybe, help others learn from it too. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that when you own the land, the lake, and the only parking lot, you don't have to yell. You just have to stand firm, stay calm, and let the truth do the talking. The chaos unfolding in the HOA wasn't just external anymore, it was eating them from within. The petition to remove the current board picked up steam fast, and within just a week, nearly 70% of homeowners had signed it. That was well over the threshold needed to call for a vote. Karen, Greg, and Susan tried to claim it was all invalid, that I had somehow manipulated residents or spread false information, but they couldn't stop the tide. The special election was scheduled for the following Saturday, and the pressure building around the board was impossible to ignore. I stayed quiet, playing no visible role, but I knew the storm was forming. The irony was rich. It spent months trying to control me, evict me, harass me off my own land, and now their own people were kicking them out. But like I expected, they didn't go down gracefully. 2 days before the election, I received a notice taped to my fence. It was a bogus order to cease occupancy, citing fake environmental violations related to my septic system. I laughed and forwarded it to my attorney, who contacted the county and confirmed it was entirely fabricated. He sent a warning letter to the HOA, telling them any further interference would result in a lawsuit. Still, I doubled down on my security more. Cameras, motion lights, and a second gate further up the drive. That same night, someone tried to vandalize my truck sugar in the gas tank, but I caught it early thanks to a motion alert. The camera caught someone in a hoodie sprinting away. I didn't recognize them, but the timing wasn't a coincidence. The next day, a drone flew low over my cabin and hovered by the dock. I stepped out and recorded it with my phone before it buzzed away. The harassment was cowardly now and desperate, but I didn't flinch. I simply documented everything, forwarded it to my lawyer, and kept my schedule. Saturday arrived with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The vote took place in the community clubhouse, and I stayed out of it, but my phone lit up. Like a Christmas tree with messages from residents giving me the blow-by-blow. Turnout was huge. Greg tried to give a speech, but people booed him down. Karen tried to appeal to emotion, but no one cared anymore. When the votes were tallied, the results were brutal. Overwhelming support for removing the board and replacing them with new volunteers. Karen, Greg, and Suzanne were all out. The new board, led by a calm, middle-aged man named Frank, made their first act clear. They were suspending all disputes related to my property and launching an internal investigation into the prior board's conduct. I didn't celebrate outwardly. I didn't need to. Just walking along the shoreline, peaceful and quiet, was enough. The nightmare was over, at least, that version of it. But part of me knew better than to relax entirely. Karen wasn't someone who vanished quietly. In fact, I had already heard from a neighbor that she was rallying her few remaining allies to file a civil suit against me, claiming emotional distress and loss of community access. It was laughable, but not harmless. People like her didn't stop. They just changed tactics. So I got ahead of it. I met with a PR consultant and a property law expert. Together, we put together a public statement I could release if needed, outlining the timeline of events, documented threats, legal communications, and my rights as the landowner. I even prepared a packet for local media just in case Karen tried to go public with some twisted version of the truth. A week after the vote, I got a certified letter from Karen's lawyer. It's just as expected, civil complaint, baseless, poorly written, filled with emotional language and zero hard evidence. My lawyer responded with a motion to dismiss, citing malicious prosecution and harassment. It was clear she had no real case, just bruised pride and a need to feel powerful. Her tantrum had unintended consequences. It reignited interest in the entire situation, and suddenly, local outlets began sniffing around the story. One reporter reached out to me directly, asking for an interview. I was hesitant at first, but then I thought, why not? Let people see. What happens when an HOA goes off the rails? When power is abused? And when the quiet guy with the lake in the parking lot decides he's not going to be bullied? So I agreed. We filmed the segment from my dock, overlooking the calm water. Told my side with facts, evidence, and a straight face. No embellishment, no rage, just the truth. When the piece aired, it exploded. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments, and a wave of support I didn't expect. Suddenly, I wasn't just a cabin owner fighting a corrupt HOI, was a local symbol of standing up to petty tyranny. Karen must have seen it too, because her civil case quietly disappeared not long after. But the fallout didn't stop with her. The county began auditing all HOA developments near the lake. Inspectors started popping up everywhere, reviewing permits and easements long ignored. Few neighboring HOAs even held emergency meetings, trying to get ahead of any scandals before someone like me started asking questions. All because one board got too greedy and pushed too far. Through it all, I kept my head down and my land protected. I installed a new boat lift, added solar lights along the dock, and landscaped the edge of the parking lot just because I could. I wasn't trying to rub it in anyone's face. I just wanted peace, and now, finally, I had it. But even with everything that happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that the final chapter hadn't been written yet. Karen was quiet, but not gone, and something told me if she ever found a way to strike back, she'd try. I just hoped, when she did, I'd be ready for her. Months passed, and the seasons shifted from the vibrant greens of summer to the fiery reds and oranges of fall, and then into the still, quiet beauty of winter. The lake froze over in parts, and I allowed residents to ice skate so long as they signed a simple waiver and followed some basic safety rules. What had once been a war zone was now a community hub. I'd even hung up a string of lights around the dock and cabin, and come December, the whole area had a holiday glow. The HOA, under Frank's new leadership, held its first community-wide Christmas celebration by the water, with cocoa stands, games for the kids, and even a visit from a local volunteer dressed as Santa, people I never expected to smile in my Direction now approached me with warmth, and many offered heartfelt thanks for not selling out, for not giving up the lake, and for standing my ground. I didn't need their praise, but it confirmed what I had already begun to believe. When you protect something valuable with integrity, others eventually recognize the truth. Frank and I grew closer, becoming something like reluctant friends. He was open about how the power of the HOA had been abused in the past, and how he hoped to model transparency and fairness moving forward. I respected him for owning up to it, and he appreciated that I had never painted him with the same brush. As Karen, even when things were at their worst, together, we helped draft new HOA bylaws that clearly defined their jurisdiction rules, that explicitly excluded any private lake property or non-HOA-owned amenities. A vote passed it unanimously. The lines were finally drawn in ink, not just in sand, but just when I began to believe all the conflict was behind me, I received an envelope that chilled me more than the December air. It came certified mail from a corporate-sounding legal firm out of state. Inside was a notice of intent to purchase the land surrounding the lakeland adjacent to mine, but not owned by the HOA. It had been quietly sold by a private developer I didn't even know was involved. The buyer? A real estate group affiliated with a major resort chain who were planning to build luxury cabins, a boat rental marina, and even a private clubhouse. I sat stunned, reading the blueprints, the projected timelines, the copywritten branding. This was bigger than the HOA. This was a machine. I immediately called the county clerk's office and requested a halt on any permits related to the lakes. Because although they could build next to it, they couldn't use the lake itself not without my consent. I still owned the water, the access, and the parking lot. They couldn't bring tourists, guests, or customers to the shore unless I gave them an easement or license, and I had no intention of doing so. A week later, I was contacted by a smooth-talking executive who offered me a generous sum to essentially sign over access rights. He framed it as a win-win. I'd make a profit, they'd bring jobs and tourism, and the community would thrive. I listened politely and then declined. Politely, he laughed at first, thinking I was negotiating. Then he got frustrated. Then the threats come, not legal ones, not outright, but veiled comments about eminent domain, influence at the county level, and how progress couldn't be stopped by one stubborn cabin owner. I smiled, thanked him for his time, and hung up. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for something like this since the HOA mess ended. I had documented my property's historical status, its unique water rights, and the ecological protections tied to the lake's fish population and migratory bird path. I'd filed preservation paperwork connected with a local land trust and already drawn the attention of a couple environmental attorneys who would jump at the chance to defend my land against commercial exploitation. A week later, I launched a community petition and within days had hundreds of signatures opposing the development. Even Frank and the HOA got behind it. Seeing now what I had always seen, the lake was not just a commodity, it was a legacy. It didn't take long for the press to get wind of the fight. Cabin owner battles resort giant over pristine lake, read one headline. I gave a couple interviews.com and measured. Speaking not about ownership, but about stewardship. Or it wasn't. About me, it was about preserving something that didn't need to be paved over for profit. The resort company wasn't ready for that kind of public blowback. They tried to rebrand, adjust plans, even suggested building further inland and away from the water, but the community wasn't having it. Not after everything we'd been through. I think what truly saved us, though, was the simple fact that no matter how much money they threw around, they couldn't fabricate the kind of connection I had built here. I hadn't bought loyalty. I had earned it. From the youngest kids who learned to swim at the dock to the old-timers who came to fish each weekend, people trusted me because I never once betrayed the lake's purpose. And when push came to shove, they showed up in force. County meetings overflowed with residents. Social media lit up with local stories. The pressure worked. The company withdrew its plans before the new year began. They never even broke ground. Instead, they sold the parcel off again, this time to a conservancy group I had helped identify. The land would remain undeveloped, protected forever. As I stood on the dock watching a fresh layer of snow cover the frozen lake, I realized that Karen had been the first test, but she wasn't the last. There would always be someone trying to chip away at things they didn't understand, but I was no longer alone in that fight. I had a community now. And this time, we weren't just defending a cabin or a parking lot. We were defending a piece of our identity. And for that, I was ready. Spring arrived early that year, melting away the last of winter's chill and leaving the lake shimmering like a mirror under soft April sunlight. With the resort development officially abandoned and the Conservancy group stepping in as stewards of the surrounding land, peace finally felt permanent. For the first time in years, I breathed easy without watching over my shoulder for lawsuits, land grabs, or scheming neighbors. My cabin, once a target of unwanted attention, had become a landmark of resistance and preservation. And the lake untouched, unspoiled, remained the crown jewel of the area. What struck me most was how the community transformed. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved as they passed my gravel driveway. Frank, who had started as an adversary, became an unexpected ally and frequent visitor. We'd often sit by the fire pit near the dock, sipping coffee and talking about how things had changed for the better. The HOA, once a weaponized tool of control, now operated with transparency, fairness, and humility. They hosted events that brought real value to residents, consulted property owners before making decisions, and even established a neighborhood fund to help maintain shared spaces. The lake was no longer a pawn. It was the beating heart of the town. And still, I held the deed in my hand, a quiet, constant reminder of the power I'd fought so hard to preserve. Yet I'd never used it to exclude or dominate. Instead, I kept the lake open, inviting, but firm in my boundaries. People respected that. They respected me. The parking lot remained a shared resource, but under a signed agreement that ensured the HOA could never again attempt to claim it without my say-so. Docks were maintained, fishing rights clarified, and I even allowed limited kayak and canoe rentals on weekends, with all proceeds going to local youth programs. Kids who once feared speaking to the man in the troublemaker's cabin now ran down the dock in bathing suits, cannonballing into the water with squeals of joy. One of those kids, a boy named Eli, handed me a crayon drawing one afternoon of the lake, a stick figure version of me in a little brown cabin, and the words "Thank you for our lake" scrawled in crooked handwriting. I kept that drawing on my fridge ever since. Still, even in peace, I never stopped preparing. Life had taught me that greed doesn't give up, it just finds new faces, so I made sure my paperwork stayed up to date. I connected with local environmental groups, kept my ties with legal allies strong, and documented everything about the land's history and ecological significance. This lake wasn't going to vanish under concrete, not on my watch. One evening, I stood by the water and watched the sun dip behind the trees, casting golden streaks across the surface. I thought back to that first week when I moved in, how Karen had stormed in like she owned the place, barking orders, slapping on fake violations, and trying to evict me from what she thought was just a temporary guest in her community. She had no idea I owned the lake, no idea I controlled their only parking lot, and no idea that her push to evict me would lead to a complete reversal of power. Her downfall had started with arrogance, but ended with accountability. She had been fined, removed, and left with a reputation in shambles. Last I heard, she moved several towns over. Still in an HOA, apparently. Some people never learn. But for us, the ones who stayed, who chose unity over division and preservation over profit, we built something stronger than fences or rules. We built trust. And trust doesn't come from HOA threats or corporate brochures. It comes from standing your ground when it matters most. It comes from knowing the land, protecting its history, and using power not for control, but for stewardship. I still lived in the same cabin, still fished at dawn, still shoveled the snow from the dock in winter. But now I did it with pride and peace. I knew that if anyone ever tried again to take what wasn't theirs, they wouldn't just be facing me, they'd be facing the entire community that once tried to drive me out. They'd be facing the legacy of a lake that couldn't be bought. And if that day ever came again, I'd be ready, because some things are worth fighting for. no matter how quiet or small they seem. The truth is, I never wanted to control anyone. I just wanted to be left alone, to enjoy the cabin I worked hard for and the lake I legally owned. When push came to shove, I learned how to push back harder with facts, with grit, and with the full force of the law on my side. So, to anyone out there facing a similar fight against arrogance, entitlement, or injustice, know this: you're not powerless. Not if you stand firm. Document everything, and never let someone else's illusion of authority steal your rights. Karen tried to evict me, but I ended up changing everything. She didn't know I owned the lake, didn't know I controlled the parking lot. She definitely didn't know that this quiet cabin would become the center of a movement she couldn't stop. And if she ever watches this story, well, maybe next time she'll think twice before storming in. If you enjoyed this story and want more real drama from the wild world of HOAs, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel, where the quiet ones always fight back hardest.